Hello and welcome to the EDH Recast. My name is Dana Roach and I'm joined today by a man who shouts blackjack every time he hits someone for 21 commander damage. It's Matt Morgan.
That is true. I do that. So thank you for observing and remembering that. But Dana, actually, I wanted to let you know. So I was driving to hang out with some friends the other day. A truck full of Vicks Vapor Rub crashed in the middle of the highway. It was during rush hour, so I was really surprised. Amazingly, there was no congestion at all.
Wow, I wonder how many of our listeners are like, what is Vicks Vapor Rub? They just have no idea what it even is.
Well, they're probably just mad that I said there's no traffic during rush hour, and I'm not trying to rub it in, but I mean, that's just how it works in my area.
Oh. I like how you always have like a second terrible joke lined up, just ready to go in the holster for us.
There's always a follow-up. There's always got to be. You just gotta. The jokes get funnier when you explain them more, and that's my just hard stance on comedy.
Oh, I'm with you there. Well, Matt, what are we talking about here today?
So we want to go through and talk about just how we approach game changers and when we put them in our own decks, and especially when bracket 3, you're only allowed 3 game changers in your decks. And so really you have to make some hard deck building decisions. And we just want to take everybody through our own approach when it comes to how we evaluate, especially in bracket 3, where game changers lie and their priority when they're competing with other game changers.
Yeah, we got a little bit of time to kind of sleep on these and get a feel for like how they work in our decks versus when the list was first released. So let's talk about how we feel about these individual cards and how they impact how we brew. But first, we are proud to be partners with Dragon Shield, the premier maker of Magic the Gathering sleeves. And in addition to their excellent array of sleeves and deck boxes, Dragon Shield also has released the newest version of their Card Manager app to help you track your collection. You can find it on both iOS and the Google Store by searching for Dragon Shield. Protect your cards like a dragon. And
if you'd like to support the show, you can do so in all sorts of ways, whether you leave us a review, subscribe on YouTube, even just liking this video, just awesome free ways that do mean a lot to us. But if you would like to support us directly, you can go to patreon.com/EDHRecast. We have all sorts of patron tiers just as a way to say thank you for supporting us over on Patreon. We've been doing a lot of patron-only content over there too lately, making sure that everybody knows we appreciate their support over on Patreon. So if you'd like to see that, you want to join our Discord community, you want to see historic challenge stats picks, there's all that and more over at patreon.com/EDHRecast, including the coveted shout out of the week. And so this week we're going to give a very special shout out to Daniel Wormkey. So I'm very glad you weren't cold key to the idea of coming to patreon.com/EDHRecast. But Daniel, we definitely appreciate the support. So thank you so much for going over there and supporting the show.
All right, Matt, should we jump into talking about some of these game changers and what ones we want to put into our deck and how we feel about them now that they've had a little bit of chance to kind of sit in our brains and make an impact on how we brew our decks?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I feel like we need to make a few kind of disclaimers too before we get going, Dana, because we're evaluating all these game changers against each other. We're not rating them or kind of comparing them against every other card out there because... And especially in bracket 3, which is kind of where we're focusing today, the deck building constraints of bracket 3, for you and I especially, has been really, really interesting because you have to make really hard choices when it comes to game changers.
Yeah, like if you're, playing an Azorius deck in bracket 4 or something, if the card is good enough for your list, you can just put it in your deck. You don't have to worry about it taking up a slot. If you're playing in bracket 2, well, you're not running any game changers. Bracket 3, you have to then actually make a decision. You're like, okay, well, if I want to run a Teferi's Protection, that's taking up one of my 3 slots. And that might be taking a slot where I want to run Smothering Tithe or something. Mm-hmm. You have to make those choices. Mm-hmm. And that's where I've found in the last, several weeks and several months since we've had this system in place, it's really made a stark contrast between some of these cards for me where when it wasn't an issue before, when you didn't have to think about game changers, well, you could just run multiple of them. Mm-hmm. Once you had to match them up head to head, that really makes it apparent which cards are ones you care about, maybe which ones are ones you don't.
Yeah, they really do have to stand out. And which ones do you want to run, like you said? Yeah. So there's a system that we kind of created here to help us evaluate and give some stats. I mean, we are EDH Recast, so some sort of way to measure how we feel about them. So just a quick 1 to 4 scale and just for what those numbers mean. So number 1 is, we'll really only play this game changer in decks that are built around that. There's some examples. I think for me, Coalition Victory is kind of the penultimate. You're not going to play in just any deck. You have to build around it. Yeah. So then we have a 2 score, which is they're fine. They're maybe a little narrow for most decks, but they're okay. We don't really have any fault with them. And then a 3 rating, where these are good, but they're not sacred. They're not something that like we are beholden to keeping in there. And then a 4 rating is just, this card is always going to be considered for every deck, no matter what. It might even push out other game changers, just because like these are just either overwhelmingly powerful or they're just generically just very good in every single deck. So that's just a quick rundown of the 1 through 4 system that we're going to use for the sake of this episode. And again, comparing game changers against each other, not against the rest of the field of cards you could be playing. Because that's thousands and thousands of cards.
And the other thing we'll probably talk about a little bit with each individual card too is talk about them kind of in a general sense, and then maybe a little bit about how we personally feel about them too, because like, it's clear, to use Cyclonic Rift for an example. It's not a card I have in any one of my decks. I don't like running it for some reason maybe we'll talk about when we get to that point. But it's clearly a fantastic card in literally every deck where it can run. So like just because I'm not running it doesn't mean I'm evaluating it incorrectly. That card, if you are playing blue, it's going to be probably the best blue card in your deck or one of the best blue cards in your deck in bracket 3.
Yeah.
So there's a difference too, and we'll probably talk about that between how good a card is just in a kind of general sense, and whether or not we would actually use it and why we wouldn't, perhaps.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's get into it then, Dana. So what is our first card that we're going to talk about, though?
The first one is Ad Nauseam, which is seen a lot of play in Eternal formats and sees a ton of play in CEDH. It is an absolute powerhouse of a draw engine. You are basically revealing cards on top of your library and taking damage for the mana value of that card, and you can dig down as deep as you want to go, basically. As much life as you want to lose to put cards in your hand, that's what it does. So
5 mana for basically a potentially infinite draw engine. I mean, you might die, but who knows? So where do you stand on this one?
I would rate it a 1. Your deck has to be built around it, which every CEDH deck really kind of accidentally is for the most part, that they're so low to the ground. Additionally, CEDH is playing in a space where they're looking for a certain card, usually for some kind of a combo engine. It's perfect there. Their decks are kind of built to use that card. Most decks outside of that environment are not. Bracket 3 especially decks are not. It's just a good way to take a ton of damage for a couple of cards, and I don't think it's particularly good in that environment unless you have a super specific deck, and I feel like it's not particularly good for most folks unless they're running a very specific deck.
Yeah, I also gave it a 1 rating. I was tempted to give it a 2 just because we've talked all the time about how curves just in general are just getting cheaper and cheaper. Like the mana values of every spell out there, like it's getting more and more efficient, and this is how Commander's kind of gotten over the past few years. I do think it'll be a tipping point. Like if you are in a very risky strategy, or maybe you're playing a life gain deck and you have life to give, totally go for it. I totally understand it there. But for the most part, you have to be playing a pretty specific deck to really want to play Ad Nauseam in my mind.
Like if you're playing Shirei Shizo's Caretaker, where like every card is by design based on the commander, like a 1-drop or something for the most part. Okay, well that's amazing. Sure. You're gonna draw 25 cards and take like 11 damage or something. Outside of that, it's just not something the average person's playing very often.
For sure. Well, so the next card, Ancient Tombs, and we're going to go alphabetically through all of the game changers here for the most part. Ancient Tomb, this is a card that I know you play in so many decks, or played, because I did, not every deck that you have is a 3. Where do you fall on Ancient Tomb?
So this would be, I would call this a 4. It's always in consideration in bracket 3. I don't know if I have it in every bracket 3 deck, but like I have a tough time not running it. It ramps you ahead, and it doesn't suck up a slot. Like there are plenty of cards that do push you ahead, the Mana Vaults of the world, but I have to devote a slot to them. What I don't have to for Ancient Tomb, and that's to me the power of that card. I don't have to give anything up to run it.
I get that feeling. It is as free as a game changer can be when it comes to the deck building constraints. I also see, I've seen so many people, they play it on turn 2 and they end up paying, 15
for ssure.
Well, I guess not 15, but 16, 17, like 18 life. Like it adds up over the course of a game. And so like if you're playing this and, games are going long, this can absolutely be like half your life. And that to me is kind of a risky proposition. So I don't have it as a 4 like you do. I have it as a 3, where I think it is definitely good. It is anything that accelerates you in mana in general is super, super powerful. I also don't think this is like something that, like we said in the description of a 3 rating. It's not sacred for sure. I think that if there's something else that falls better into your strategy, you should definitely give, in my mind, Ancient Tomb a look for getting cut.
I don't disagree with you. I totally get that 3 rating. We might have situations where I'm like, I can't agree with you there, Matt. But like 3, I get where you're coming from completely.
Yeah.
And I'm reckless with my life, so like that makes me maybe rate it a little bit higher because I don't worry about that like maybe I should. So.
Fair.
Number 3 here, Aura Shards. Selesnya enchantment. Whenever a creature comes into play, you destroy a target artifact or enchantment. Where do you have this one rated, Matt?
Mm-hmm. I had this one as a 3. I really like this. I have it in a deck, but it's also built to play a bunch of flicker effects. It's built to play Panharmonicon. This is super powerful. It's always really hard, but having a repeatable engine to kill enchantments, which can be a little hard to do, especially if you're outside of green, but you're green-white here. Man, having an engine to just keep going on and on instead of a one-time effect, that's super powerful for me.
It is, undoubtedly. I would still, I'm calling this a 2. I'm going to say it's
sure.
It's fine, maybe too narrow. And the reason I would say that is because the better your deck is suited to play this card, the more oppressive it is. You know, if you're playing a token deck, if you're doing a bunch of flicker things or whatever. Yeah. And so it can create play patterns maybe aren't great for the entire table. You know, maybe your friends are into that, and that's fine. If you know, a bunch of your play groups are all perverts and they like stacks. You don't listen to Commander Sphere. It's an old reference to stacks players being perverts. Yeah, like it can cause play patterns that are problematic, but like if you are playing in a Selesnya deck that's like dropping tokens in the field constantly and people around you don't care, it does so much work. So the play pattern is a problem, but it's a very, very, very good card.
This one, because of that play pattern, that's why it's a game changer. So it's going to get relegated to bracket 3, bracket 4, bracket 5, where that's kind of expected. Maybe not expected, but like the social contract takes over a little bit and does a lot of lifting for it. So, but I understand why. Yeah, it does lead to some unsavory play patterns. So, one card that I'm actually curious on your take on, because you do like to play loose with your life total, Bolas' Citadel is next. So it's 3 black, legendary artifact. Look at the top card of your library at any time, and you can play the top card of your library. If you cast a spell this way, you pay life equal to its mana value rather than pay the mana cost. You can tap it and sack 10 permanents, and each opponent loses 10 life.
I've got this as a 2 as well. It's fine, but it's maybe too narrow for most decks. The decks that where it's really, really good, again, with a low overhead where you can cast a bunch of things and maybe not lose much life at all, it's excellent. I don't know how many decks that counts for, you know? Sure. And again, you're making a choice, and unless you have that deck where it's a perfect selection, I just want to draw a couple cards rather than have this where I'm going to catch myself spending 6 mana sometimes, like, oh, well, there's an 8 drop on top now. And next turn there's a 5 drop. Like that wasn't worth it for me. I would have rather just read the bones.
I do wonder if, again, because this is in game changer status, the curve, kind of the same argument for ad nauseum, where you're going to crank through cards because the curves are typically lower, more efficient spells. That's where Bolas' Citadel really shines anyways, and that's probably why it got on the game changer list to begin with. So I put this as a 2 as well. I think that it's pretty good. Just not every deck is going to want this by default, which I think a higher rating kind of would encourage.
Yeah, this is a good example of a card where, like, we're talking about it in the context of bracket 3. If I was playing a bracket 4 deck, the things that you're doing in bracket 4 and the way you would brew your deck in bracket 4 makes this a much better card there. It's just that
significantly different. Yeah,
the way you're brewing in bracket 3 makes it less likely to be really good in your deck.
Yeah, well, let's get to the next card. And I think we just take a second to let's knock all the legends out of the way here too, because we're going to start with Braids Cabal Minion, which is the recently unbanned Braids Cabal Minion. So not a lot of people have gotten a chance to play against it yet. 2 black for a 2/2 human minion. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player sacrifices an artifact, creature, or land. So this was banned for a long, long time because of the play patterns of, okay, I'm just going to cast a Dark Ritual, play an extra piece of ramp, and like this is out on turn 1 or 2 sometimes. And so this gets to create some very unsavory play patterns. I would say more so than Aura Shards.
Yeah, definitely. So the first note I'll throw out here, and this is going to apply to all these legends that we're going to talk about here. I do a weird thing when I brew. I want all of my creatures in the deck to fit whatever the specific theme of that deck is. So like if I'm playing a deck that's built around like blinking stuff, I want every single creature to like do a blink thing. Or if I'm playing a dragon deck, they have to be dragons or whatever that winds up being. So for me, I'm not playing any of these ever in a situation, regardless of play pattern.
Yeah.
Because like I'm just brewing thematically in a weird way where like it's just they're not going to work in my deck. And that said, trying to evaluate them kind of in a vacuum, not just for my decks. Yeah, Braids is a weird one. I think it doesn't make for a great play pattern, particularly in bracket 3 necessarily. And if you're comparing this to the other things that you could be running, the amount of decks that want this to be one of their 3, there's very few of them, I think.
Braids is very, very powerful. It is arguably like one of the most powerful cards if you ramp it out early, but it's only really good in decks that are built to abuse it. So I also had it as a 1 just because it's really narrow. If you're building around it, it's great. And if you're not building around it, it's just kind of a side card in there that you just happen to put in there. It's not going to do near as much, I don't think.
And Braids shines in a Braids deck, I guess, is the way I would phrase that. 100%.
Yeah. All right, so how about Grand Arbiter Augustin the Fourth, which is still a pain in the butt, if you ask me.
Yeah. Well, the thing in Grand Augustin here, again, we're in Azorius colors. So like Braids, if you're playing a mono black deck, well, your choice of game changers in mono black is way narrower. Maybe Braids breaks through if you're doing sacrifice stuff. Grand Arbiter, you're in 2 colors at least. There's a lot more competition for this slot. The amount of decks where I'm like, well, I want Grand Arbiter more than I want Teferi's Protection or Smothering Tithe or Ancient Tomb or Enlightened Tutor or like, so this to 1 is a 1 to me.
Sure. Yeah. Also a 1. Again, Grand Arbiter is really good in Grand Arbiter decks.
Sure. Yeah.
If you build around it, it's oppressively and frustratingly powerful. But also, if you're trying to play a blue-white control deck, there's other ways you can play blue-white control. Like that's not the only real strategy that you can be doing, or the only commander, I guess, that lends itself to that strategy.
Absolutely. There are very few situations where I think that's what I want to be doing in bracket 3. I want this over the other options.
Yeah. So
up next, Jin-Gitaxias Core Augur, maybe the most oppressive of that initial group of the first monocolor Praetors we had.
Yeah.
Jin-Gitaxias, your opponents have to discard down to no cards in hand at their end step. No one likes to see this card hit the field, and everyone immediately like has a response, or this is the one thing that will be dealt with when it lands.
Yeah.
I'm going to call this a 1. Like years and years ago, I had it in a deck, and it's not that it wasn't good. It's that the amount of like attention it drew towards me, even after it was removed, everyone was like, well, it's gone, but we don't care. You played that card. It never, ever felt like it was worth spending the mana on it for what it did in everyone's reactions to me. So like, this is going to be a 1 for me. I can't imagine choosing this over the other options I could be choosing in these colors.
Sure. I think this card needs to get evaluated, not just in the 99, because it is, or not just in the command zone, I should say, because it is pretty good in the 99. And I do need to make a distinction. Like it does have flash. It is 10 mana for a 5/4. Right. At the beginning of your end step, you draw 7 cards, and then each opponent's maximum hand size is reduced by 7. So it forcing discard, yes, but in a specific way. I actually think this is a 2 for me. If you're playing a Reanimator deck, this is an extremely powerful target. Like Joey's not here to talk about reanimation, graveyard strategies, and everything, so I feel like somebody has to stick up for him with this. If you're playing a Reanimator type of deck or type of strategy in bracket 3, you definitely want to give this a consideration because it's super powerful. It's going to protect itself super well just by making your opponent's top deck all the time.
Yeah,
and you're drawing a bunch of cards that you're going to discard later. Like this card does a lot. And not just strictly in the command zone either.
No, that's a good point. Like Jin-Gitaxias has flashed, and I've never seen that used. It's always a card that gets reanimated every single time. Absolutely.
It's the original card that has it has that ability too, because everybody forgets about it because the rest of the card is so powerful. So yeah.
Up next here we have Kinnan Bonder Prodigy. 2 mana for a 2/2. Whenever you tap a non-land permanent for mana, add 1 mana of any type that permanent produced. So basically it's making your mana dorks tap for twice as much mana, your mana rocks tap for twice as much mana. Anything you're tapping for mana is giving you additional bonus mana on top of it. And you can use that mana to pump into it for 7. to look at the top 5 cards of your library and put a non-human creature card from among them onto the battlefield. So you make a ton of mana and you have an ability that isn't a tap ability. It's something you can use repeatedly if you have enough mana
multiple
to just
times,
put stuff into play. Yeah. Including that Jin-Gitaxias we just got done talking about.
Yeah, this one, oh my gosh. We talk a lot on this show about cards that are setup and payoffs, and this is another one of those cards that it sets up the rest of the deck, and it has its own built-in payoff. This is a 2, like, you can put this in the 99, you can put this in command zone, and you don't really have to build around it because Simic decks already are playing so much mana acceleration anyways. Mm-hmm. And they really love mana sinks. And so like I can't put this at a 1. I just on a power level alone, and it's not super specific. I think this is a 2. Like, yeah, you're going to put this in decks. You're obviously not going to put it in every deck unless you're playing a lot of mana acceleration. But like I said, a lot of Simic decks do.
Yeah. Again, I'm not going to run this because that's just not how I'm brewing. But if you're playing Simic and your Simic deck is running a bunch of mana dorks and a bunch of, things that tap for mana, and again, you're in green, so maybe you're doing land ramp, you're fighting maybe against that accidentally, but like, let's say you're playing some kind of a deck that's in Simic and has a bunch of elves that you're using for whatever reason. Well, it's really easy to include this, just kind of mindlessly, just like with no intention of using the second ability, like just to make all of your Llanowar elves tap for 2 is really, really powerful. So
yeah,
in the decks where like it just kind of accidentally can do work, I can see why it fights for a slot against other things that you would be doing in those Simic colors for sure. Yeah,
absolutely. So next up, my least favorite card maybe of all time, Tergrid, God of Fright. We had to talk about it sooner or later, I guess. Tergrid, God of Fright, the front side, 5 mana for a 4/5 with Menace. Whenever opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent or discards a permanent card, you may put that card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. And the backside is an artifact for 4 mana. Tap it. Target opponent loses 3 life unless they sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card. And you can pay 4 mana to untap Tergrid's Lantern. Ugh, I hate this card. Hate this card.
Yeah, I mean, this is a 1 for me. Again, we're talking about me not wanting to run it, but I don't think a very good card unless you're running a deck built around the things it's doing. I just don't think that's the kind of thing that you're doing in bracket 3 very often. I think this is just a card that, unless you're brewing that kind of deck, and you're probably not doing it in bracket 3, you're not wasting a slot on it. It's just not as generically useful as something else you could be casting in these colors.
Yeah, I have it as a 2, just because unless you're running a lot of discard, like you don't accidentally put discard effects in your decks.
Yes, right.
But I can acknowledge that there's a lot of sacrifice in the format. And if you just have, if that's like what your playgroup likes to do, if you have some Aristocrats decks and you just want to shut those people down, Tergrid, God of Fright is a very, very good way to do that. I do think if you want to push it probably to the point where bracket 3 and bracket 4 decks are kind of lingering at, then yeah, it probably needs to be built around a little bit more. It shuts down fetch lands. It shuts down just a lot of just incidental things that we do in the format. So I think that's probably why it earned its spot as a game changer to begin with. But this is a 2 for me. I can't give it a 1 because it is just objectively super powerful.
Yeah, like if you're playing some kind of an edict-based deck, it's maybe the best card in your deck. But if you're not playing that, you're just hoping some things happen that give you benefit. And I don't think you want to do it unless you're in that really hyper specific list. Up next, we have Urza, Lord High Artificer. Just basically is turning every single artifact you have into a mana rock. I wrote on my list that it's a 1, but I don't think that's necessarily true. There's situations I can see where, like, if you are playing, I had this in a deck for a while. I ran it in my Azorius equipment deck because every piece of equipment can be a mana rock. That's really, really good. So, like, there's situations where it's accidentally a very, very useful card. So yeah, for that reason, I would call it anywhere from a 2 to a 3. There's decks where even if you're not like built around Urza, your deck this winds up accidentally being really, really powerful.
Yeah, this is kind of like Kinnan Bonder Prodigy in my mind. I actually have it a little bit higher. I have this as a 3 just because in the command zone, you're doing mono blue things. Plus everybody's playing a bunch of artifacts. This is kind of how the format works. This is going to be really, really impactful. Again, it sets itself up. It has the payoff and the setup card with being able to tap your untapped artifacts for blue mana, paying 5, exile a top, shuffling your library, exile a top card. You can play that card without paying its mana cost. So they're both doing similar things, just a little bit different. But man, the fact that Urza also comes down and makes a construct that just gets bigger and bigger over the course of the game. This is a very, very powerful commander, and it rightfully earned its spot on the Game Changer list.
Up next, we have Vorinclex, a Voice of Hunger, another one of the original Praetor cycles. And when you tap a land for mana, you get an additional mana from your land. And when your opponents tap a land for mana, that land doesn't untap during your opponent's next untap step. So gives you twice as much mana from your lands, and they get functionally half as much.
And for 8 mana, this warps the game so hard.
It does. And actually, I was thinking about this a little bit. One of the advantages this card has, again, in the head-to-head way we're looking at it here in bracket 3, green's Game Changers all, for the most part, are like tutors. And if you're not tutoring really or doing anything, particularly if you're in a mono green deck and you're in bracket 3, well, there's nothing competing with this, kind of, right? Like if you don't care what to go get with Worldly Tutor, if your deck isn't that kind of deck where you want to go get some silver bullet, this is just an amazing creature that's not really fighting with very much of anything. So like, I think I put a 3 down, but in that narrow situation, it's almost just all upside for you in a mono green list.
I have it as a 4. This is, if you're playing green, you just consider this. If you're playing higher powered, if you can ramp this out, it doubles your mana, that's not the unique part of this. It's halving your opponent's mana. Like the delayed trigger, where when your opponents tap the land, that mana is still lost for the next turn. Mm-hmm. Like it warps the game. That's probably the only way that I can just like truly state it properly. This is a 4. Like if you're playing green and you're playing in some higher power brackets, you definitely want to give Vorinclex a consideration.
Next, I'm on the legendary creatures here. We have Winota, Joiner of Forces for 4 mana. Whenever a non-human creature you control attacks, look at the top 6 cards of your library, and you may put a human creature from among them onto the battlefield tapped and attacking, and it gains indestructible till end of turn.
This one's interesting.
You're in Boros colors at the very least with this, so there's a lot more competition here for this kind of thing. Okay, well, now I have to consider, even if you're playing less than a Boros creatures deck and this isn't in your command zone, if you're playing some kind of a Boros combat deck, this I think is something you're probably fairly strongly considering, I would guess.
Yeah.
It's competing with a lot of things we've talked about in because you've got twice as many colors of something like Vorinclex potentially, but very, very good card, just accidentally in a lot of decks, I think. So this is a 2 at least for me, I would say, if not a 3.
This is a 2 for me. I think CEDH is where it really tends to shine.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
That's the only thing is there's still enough deck building constraints kind of built in. But it is super powerful. I struggle even giving it just a 2 rating. But the deck building constraints and just the hoops you have to jump through a little bit when you're building the deck, that's the only thing in my mind keeping it back. Whereas in CEDH, in bracket 5, that's already taken into consideration. That is the goal of the deck, in fact. So yeah, in bracket 3, though, I do think it's probably a 2.
Well, last, among the legendary creatures, we have Yuriko, the Tiger's Shadow. This is Dimir Commander for 3 mana. It has Commander Ninjutsu, and whenever a ninja you control deals combat damage to a player, reveal the top card of your library and put that card into your hand, and each opponent loses life equal to that card's mana value. So unlike Winota, that I think a lot of times can just accidentally be good in a Boros creature-based deck, this is so specific. It's a good card, but if you're not playing a Yuriko deck, this is similar to a kind of Grand Arbiter situation or Braid situation. Shines in a Yuriko deck, probably isn't doing very much for you outside of that. I would call it a 1 because of that.
So I struggle to say it's a 1. I think there's enough times that you can deal combat damage and have some evasive decks. This is kind of the inverse of what we talked about earlier with bracket 3 decks, where the curves start to get a little bit lower. Mm-hmm. You can still top deck some pretty big hits on things. Sure. You do have to do a little bit of work, but I think it's probably less work than Winota Joiner Forces, honestly. So probably a 2 in my mind, maybe a 3. I'm going to settle on a 2 though. My gut says that.
I think it feels narrower than Winota most of the time.
Sure. Yeah.
Because you're just going to get some generic damage out of it. Whereas Winota's going to get you really, really often a free creature swinging and attacking that's indestructible. But, maybe it comes down to your deck construction too. And I do think Yuriko does have a home in some other top deck matters kind of decks where it's just a second piece to function those lists. But outside of that environment, like it's competing with all the tutors you have access to. It's competing with Rift. It's competing with Bolas of Citadel. Yeah. Unless the deck really cares about a narrow thing, I would have a tough time trying to figure out why I would want to run it over those things.
Yeah. Well, Dana, real quick, before we get any further into the game changers, I know going through the commanders and the legends here, that took a little bit. So let's take a quick break for Challenger Stats. We'll come back and finish up the game changers on the second half of the show.
That sounds good.
Alright everyone, time to be honest. This may be a Magic the Gathering Commander channel, but in all of our personal lives, Magic the Gathering is not the only game that we play. I'm always on the lookout to expand my game knowledge and prowess, plus I've got a ton of friends who I love to game with but who don't play Magic, and that's why I'm super excited to talk to you about this episode's sponsor, Sunderfolk. Sunderfolk is a shared turn-based tactical RPG adventure, one that seeks to capture that magic of tabletop gaming with your friends. It's like bringing a board game to the living room, but with that feeling of a couch co-op where your phone is your controller. A lot like Jackbox Party Pack for those who are familiar with that game. You can buy just one copy of the game and play with 3 friends, of course at no extra cost, taking up the role of Arcanist, Bard, Berserker, Ranger, Rogue, or Pyromancer. I'm confident all you mono red players perked up your ears at that one, and work together to defend the town, venture into the Sunderlands, and engage in tactical turn-based combat. Friends and family will learn to play super quickly because all the information you need is right in the palm of your hand. Rediscover game night with a tabletop-style RPG placed right onto your phone that you can play with your friends. Download Sunderfolk on PC, PlayStation 5, Xbox Series XS, and Nintendo Switch now. This episode is brought to you by our favorite deck builder, Archidekt. Archidekt offers so many features to make your brewing experience super easy, from custom categories to helpful sorting methods and giving you tons of data about your deck too. Color breakdown, mana curve, but also things like your probability of drawing certain categories of cards at a certain time in the game, which you know I'm using to make sure that I have a better chance of drawing both my graveyard filling cards and my reanimation spells on time. Plus, their deck playtester is undeniably the best in the biz. Super intuitive game actions from start phases to tapping groups of cards to copying tokens to proliferating all your counters are all handled for you with a single keystroke. And I've got to shout out my all-time favorite feature that when you're brewing on Archidekt, you can drag and drop a card from EDHREC or from Scryfall right into your deck list. This saves me so much time not having to type while I'm brewing. Even the way that they make importing a full deck list onto the site is super easy. And you know what? Archidekt even has a creators page that shows you when updates have been made to your favorite creators' decks, so you can see, for instance, what I'm trying out with my signature Baba list, or whatever new hipster strategy Dana is currently tinkering with. You can check out our deck lists linked in the description of every video at archidekt.com/edhrecast. That's archidekt.com/edhrecast. Go get EDH wrecked at Archidekt.
So my challenge this week is for the card Necrologia in Starscream Power Hungry decks. Necrologia, 3 double black for an instant. Cast this spell only during your end step, and has an additional cost to cast this spell, pay X life, and draw X cards. Necrologia is a pretty decent draw effect, kind of an ad nauseum-esque thing that we're talking about here, but you're just paying 1 life for each of the cards, not for the card's mana value. But you have a very narrow window when you can cast it, which is just during your end step. That's probably why it doesn't see as much play as some of the other big draws that are available in black. However, in Starscream Power Hungry, you kind of don't care about when you draw those cards, because what's important is you dealing the damage to everybody. Starscream's ability, whenever you draw a card, if you are the monarch, target opponent loses 2 life. And you don't have to spend X mana to draw cards like you would do with some other black draw spells. In this case, you're spending 5 mana, trading whatever life you have to probably kill somebody. It's just an excellent spell in Starscream Power Hungry, and even if you're not using it as a kill spell, then it can use as just a backup draw source, and it should see more play in Starscream decks.
Well, Dana, let me keep us moving then. So I'm going to do our listener submitted challenge stats. So this week we got an email from Manuel Hain. And Manuel, I hope I said your last name right. If I didn't, I apologize. But Manuel's email caught my attention. It said, I was playing around with Eshki Teemer's Roar and had its challenge stats for them with Tanazir Quandrix coming in from Strixhaven in the build, and I think this Elder Dragon is very strong for the deck. So Eshki Teemer's Roar is the pre-con version of the Teemer legend that has, whenever you cast a creature spell, you put a +1/+1 counter on Eshki. If that spell's power is 4 or greater, you draw a card, and if that spell's power is 6 or greater, Eshki deals damage equal to Eshki's power to each opponent. And Tanazir Quandrix comes in as a 5-mana Simic legend that's 3 blue and a green for a 4/4 with flying and trample. But the important abilities is that when Tanazir Quandrix enters the battlefield, you double the number of +1/+1 counters on target creature you control. I'm assuming you're going to target Eshki with that. And whenever Tanazir Quandrix attacks, you may have the base power and toughness of other creatures you control become equal to Tanazir Quandrix's power and toughness until end of turn. And I really like this challenge here. So it's going to trigger both of Eshki's abilities. It's not going to trigger the biggest one there, but that's all right because the attack trigger there, if you look at the typical Eshki Teamers Roar deck, you're playing a lot of mana dorks, you're playing a lot of small creatures that are going to accelerate you into the later game. And so having an attack trigger like Tanazir Quandrix that is going to beef up all of those creatures, and if you're putting +1/+1 counters on a bunch of other creatures, this adds up pretty quickly. It doubles the number of counters, like we said, likely to go onto Eshki and makes her third ability so much more powerful, especially if this isn't the first or second big creature that you're casting throughout the game. So, Manuel, this is a great challenge. I really like this. Points out like it's not really being played on really any Eshki decks, which I don't know if this fits in every single one. It doesn't trigger all three of Eshki's abilities, which I think is pretty important. But if you're looking for a creature that's going to trigger two of those and buff up Eshki pretty considerably, Tanazir Quandrix is a great find. So thank you, Manuel, for your email and for your challenge.
And Challenge Sets is brought to you by Cardsphere, our favorite way to turn unplayed cards into played cards. You simply send out cards that you don't need to folks who have them on their want list, and this adds credit to your account for folks to send you cards. Or you can add money directly to your account that way if you prefer. I just wanted to get a bunch of Final Fantasy cards just pre-release week, and I put them on my list. By Saturday afternoon, they were already on their way to me. It's a great way to brew a new deck. Build a deck your opponent's fear with Cardsphere.
All right, Dana, let's get back into knocking out the rest of these game changers. I think it's going to go a little bit quicker just because we don't have to talk about cards being in the 99 and the command zone. So next up, let's get to Chrome Mox and how we approach that when it's competing with other game changers. I'm actually, this is another card. I'm super curious about how you approach something kind of specific, but very powerful like Chrome Mox.
It's super powerful, but I feel like trading a non-artifact, non-land card from your hand to play a piece of ramp in bracket 3 just isn't as impactful as it is in 4 or 5. Particularly compared to a bunch of the other things you could be doing. I just don't think this is nearly as useful there in that place over running just a Rhystic Study or running a Ancient Tomb or something. Great card, bracket 3, it feels like a 1 to me. I just don't think there's that many decks that want this over the alternatives in that bracket.
So that's interesting that you're putting it below Ancient Tomb when this is, fast mana always seems super powerful to me. Granted, yes, there is a little bit of a downfall, like you pointed out. You have to give up a card to do that. And also, the blowouts happen with Chrome Mox every now and then, too. I still have it as a 2. Like I said, fast mana is super powerful. You don't want to put in every single deck if you don't, if your deck doesn't care about, super fast starts. But, man, it's still a very, very good card.
It is. It's just, I just think that's not the place where it shines. Similar to something like Ad Nauseam.
Yeah, no, totally understand that approach for sure.
A Coalition Victory, one of our recent unbans here. It's just an alternate win condition that needs to be something that you are playing 5-color deck to even take advantage of. This to
one
me is
for me.
It's not that it's not a perfectly fine card. This is one that's literally competing with every single card in this list. And there are situations where it's going to be a game winner, but the amount of times everything lines up and this wins you a game versus just running one of the other 60 cards on this list that you can run that are going to be better. This to me is a 1 for that reason.
Yeah, you absolutely have to build around this for to be game changer quality. It wouldn't surprise me if this isn't a game changer in a year or so when we forget that it even exists. So
sure. Yeah, no, I could see that.
Yeah. Very different from the next card in my mind, which is Consecrated Sphinx. This one, very powerful, going to see a lot of play, and you don't have to do a whole lot of work for it. 4 blue for a 4/6 with flying. Whenever an opponent draws a card, you may draw 2 cards. Dana, I love drawing cards, Roach. What's your rating on Consecrated Sphinx?
It is in my Sphinx deck and nowhere else, again, because of the way I said I brew. Ignoring my own personal weird brewing hangups, I would call it a 3. It's a very, very good card. It's vulnerable in a way that, say, Rhystic Study isn't. And I feel like you're just looking at pure power level of something, Rhystic Study being more efficient, being more tough to remove is what it's competing against. I think it's not as good as something like that, so I'm going to call it a 3, despite it being a fantastic card.
So I think it's a 4. I think there's so little work that you have to do to make Consecrated Sphinx good.
Sure.
And it's guaranteed. If your opponent draws a card, you get to draw the 2 cards versus the Rhystic Study that it's a tax on your opponents for sure, and you get to draw cards maybe, but your opponents can control that. And man, that's not saying Rhystic Study is a bad card by any means. It deserves its reputation, but in my mind, Consecrated Sphinx is definitely a 4. And again, same thing we said about Jin-Gitaxias. Like this is a perfect reanimator target.
Yeah, absolutely. Crop rotation up next. And we didn't lump this into the rest of the tutors because it feels really specific. In this case, 1 mana, you're sacrificing a land to go get another land. This I'm going to call 2 for one reason. Not that it's not amazing, but like a lot of the lands that you would most want to get with it are also game changers, which that limits how effective it is. That said, Nykthos is not a game changer. Getting a Nykthos with this is pretty great. Getting a Cabal Coffers, getting a Valakut, just getting an extra landfall trigger in a landfall deck. Like if you get nothing more than a basic land with this, plenty off, and that's a big deal in a landfall deck.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it still has a lot of use. I'm going to call it a 2 because it's like it's not particularly flashy and maybe it doesn't feel like a really impressive card, but it's got a lot of utility, and I would consider it in plenty of decks.
Yeah, I would definitely consider it. It is a 2 for me though.
Yeah.
Just because it kind of depends on what you're looking for and what's the best land you can be grabbing. And like you pointed out, Dana, most of the best lands that you can be grabbing are game changers already. So it's almost like crop rotation. It's not just one game changer. Crop rotation is 2 or 3 of your game changers because the most powerful lands that you want to be grabbing are game changers. So like you can't just put in crop rotation blindly. You have to do a little bit of work for it. And so when you think about that entire conversation and you only have 3 game changers that you can put in a bracket 3 deck, that's a really, really thought out conversation you have to have with yourself of, is crop rotation worth it for maybe these 1 or 2 lands that aren't game changers, or the 2 lands that definitely are that I do want to build around.
Right. Yes.
So
Cyclonic Rift up next. Game changer in that it changes the entire face of the game when you cast it overloaded.
It very much does.
Everyone's stuff to their hands. I won't run this in any of my decks because I just it doesn't feel good to me. So I have it in none of my lists. That said, if you're playing,
you still have it as a 4, right?
Right. If you're playing blue and you are playing in bracket 3 particularly, I don't know what else you do that's better than this. Like it's in that bracket at that power level, the best thing you can be doing for the most part.
It's the definition of a 4 rating card that we're using on the scale. Like if you're playing blue and you're playing bracket 3 and above, like you're just considering Cyclonic Rift. Like it's so powerful. You just have to.
Yeah. Again, like maybe it's too much mana for 4. It's definitely almost always considered too much for CEDH. Bracket 3 in that bracket 3 deck where things are a little bit slower. It's just the best card. The best card whenever you need it. Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, and another card too that we're going to talk about next that I think has a kind of similar but sneakier way of going about it is Deflecting Swat. So that's a free spell that you can cast as part of that cycle from the Ikoria precons. 2 in a red for an instant, but you're never casting it for 2 in a red because if you control a commander, you may cast a spell without paying its mana cost. And then you may choose new targets for target spell or ability. Being able to hit abilities on top of spells is super, super powerful. I have this as a 4 because it very easily can save you in the most crucial moments of any game.
If I'm playing red and my commander is remotely important to what I'm doing, it's a 4. I mean, like you're considering it strongly, particularly because not much else in red has that ability, let alone the ability to do it for free. It's just such a specific, such a useful card. Nothing else replicates it really for the most part. And it's just so important. Like I'm strongly considering this if I have access to red in any deck. It's a 4.
Yeah, absolutely. The flexibility, like you said, like you always want to have this, especially if your commander's worth protecting.
Yep. So now we're getting into a whole bunch of tutors, and yes, some are better than others. Demonic tutor in this kind of environment is going to probably be a better tutor than Imperial Seal more often than not. But they're all very similar. I guess myself personally, I can lump most of these in one cluster. Do you have any specific ones between, Demonic Tutor, Enlightened Tutor, Gifts Ungiven, Intuition, Mystical Tutor, Vamp Tutor, Worldly Tutor, Gamble, Imperial Seal, and I guess Natural Order? Is there anything you want to specifically talk about among that cluster of tutors, Matt?
I think most of these are going to be threes that you want to consider them, but again, these are all competing against other game changers. And if it comes down to you're playing a Demonic Tutor or a Cyclonic Rift sometimes, I would probably go with Cyclonic Rift because I just, my personal version, I don't play a bunch of tutors, but I also know they're super powerful. So I think the ones that are a little more specific, that are doing things in colors that like don't have the access. So I would say Worldly Tutor is probably a 2 for me because there's a ton of creature tutors that you can get in green. Like Natural Order is also on there. Imperial Seal, whatever. But I would say like Intuition, being able to grab multiple cards and putting them where you want them to be. Intuition and Gifts Ungiven both are 4s for me because you're getting so much more card selection. It's not just a tutor, it's putting multiple cards in places you want them to be.
Sure.
So if I were forced to play between a Mystical Tutor and a Gifts Ungiven, I'm going to play Gifts. Like that, granted, I don't always get exactly what I want, but I'm getting multiple cards in multiple places that I can take advantage of that in those decks. I think Gifts Ungiven, I've gotten to play it in one deck since it got unbanned, and it was so powerful. I loved seeing it. I think it's a great card for bracket 3 and above, honestly. Like I've been enjoying seeing it.
Mm-hmm. Well, the thing about tutors is you're never wrong. Like there's situations where like, Ad Nauseam's bad in this deck.
Yeah.
Right? Like you're kind of wrong for running it. That's never really the case with tutors. If you're playing a bracket 3 deck and like you have 2 game changers, and you're like, I'm playing with a lot of people that are like running powerful stuff for the most part. There's no reason for me to not have 3 game changers in my list.
Yeah.
Well, why not put a Demonic Tutor in your list if you have access to it? It's always going to be power positive for you in this kind of a deck. Again, like I said, you're just never wrong. If you have an open slot and you're playing and you want to be able to like maximize what you're doing in bracket 3, why not run one of these?
Yeah, they're fine to run. Like, I don't think you have to run them.
No, absolutely not.
But like you said, you're never wrong running tutors. Like that's fine.
Okay, up next here, since we've just blasted through all of them, Drannith Magistrate, a creature that basically how it usually gets used is to keep people from casting the commander from the command zone, since creatures can only be cast from your hand. What are your thoughts on Magistrate, Matt?
This one's hard for me to rate because it is so good in CEDH where you have those must kill or just must prevent type of commanders, but also people are casting things from other places than their hand. Like it happens all the time in so many games at CEDH. And in bracket 3, that happens significantly less, just the nature and how that play group is going to function. That said, if you have a lot of problematic commanders in your play group, or you have people that play like only specific strategies, then Drannith Magistrate, you want to give more priority to. So I have Drannith Magistrate as a 2, but that one is so playgroup dependent. It is absolutely frustrating, but it's really hard for me to put it higher than 2 because sometimes it might just be a blank card that just like makes everybody hate you because it only shuts down commanders and like there wasn't a commander worth stopping maybe.
Yeah, that's what I'm torn about here. Like, it has utility, and I can imagine play groups where it's really, really useful. I've seen it actually like cost the caster the game multiple times where like someone plays a Magistrate and I'm like, you're preventing player 3 from stopping player 4 now. And like that's a thing that does happen with it in a way that you don't see with other cards. So like it's something particularly in bracket 3 where it can be misplayed and actually cause you problems. So like I'm torn. I get the utility of it, but I want to call it a 1 in part because the fact that it has the ability to backfire in a way a lot of cards don't.
Yeah, and that happens probably way less in bracket 4 and 5 where the power level again sneaks up a little bit more and you're stopping a few more strategies. So I totally
every
get that
commander is a problem for the most part.
And every commander becomes a problem then for sure. So the next card up then, Expropriate, which is the 9-mana sorcery that gives everybody a vote in the Council's Dilemma. And so starting with you, each player votes for time or money. For each time vote, you take an extra turn after this one. And for each money vote, choose a permanent owned by the voter and gain control of it, and you exile Expropriate. Oh, this one This warps the game. Again, this is another card that just makes everything kind of shift.
Yeah, this is tricky. Your extra turns are similar to tutors, I think. You're never wrong taking an extra turn. That's like never bad for you, I don't think, let alone taking a couple extra turns, or taking the scariest thing, I guess. But you're never wrong here. It's a lot of mana. You're competing with, like I said, you're competing with tutors. You're competing with Rhystic Study. You're competing with the fierce guardianship we haven't even talked about yet.
Just with all the other blue, just game changers. They're all super powerful.
Yeah, it's a really powerful. This is where the comparison in bracket 3 gets challenging. It's undoubtedly a powerful card. There are very few situations where I'm going to put this in a deck over the competition. So it feels to me like I would call it maybe a 2. I just think there's always something better in bracket 3 you could be doing with those slots.
Yeah, I still think it's a 3 for me. That's the score I'm going to give it. It's just incredibly powerful. The only thing holding it back really is just it's 9 mana.
Yeah,
it's a lot. Mm-hmm. So we talked about crop rotation. Let's talk about one of the crop rotation targets, Field of the Dead. Enters battlefield tapped, tap it for colorless. When Field of the Dead or another land enters the battlefield under your control, if you control 7 or more lands with different names, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token.
And I mean, I remember once upon a time when this card was first spoiled, talking about like, oh, you can run some snow lands to make it easier to hit. No, I mean, you don't need to. Like, this is This is just almost always going to be online by turn 7 or 8, but it has to get to turn 7 or 8 for the most part. Unless you're playing green and you're ramping lands ahead. But it's a 2 in a deck that's doing landfall stuff or just ramping lands. It's accidentally just going to generate you value. But it's also not that interesting, and while it's a ton of accidental value, you need to do other things with it to have it change the course of the game, unlike, say, a Cyclonic Rift. So that's why I think I have it as a 2. I think it changes the game, I guess, in that it's super powerful, but it's not as powerful as other things you could be doing if you're devoting a slot to something.
I don't know. Like you said, there isn't a whole lot of work you have to do to make Field of the Dead really good.
Yeah, right.
And just because of how easy it is, and if you are kind of stuck, lands. You talked about how Ancient Tomb was kind of a free include as a game changer in your land base. I think the same arguments really apply to Field of the Dead. Yeah. It just has such a high upside. It's a 3 for me. Like I don't think you should be cutting other cards or other game changers, I should say, that maybe play into your strategy a little bit better, but you're never wrong for playing Field of Dead because you don't have to work very hard to make it online by, like you said, turn 7 or 8.
Yeah. Okay. Fierce Guardianship. It's a free counter spell for non-creature spells if your commander is in play. It comes down to, for me, this one, like how important my commander is. If my commander, if I'm playing blue and my commander is consistently in play, then this is a free protection spell similar to Deflecting Swat that I'm probably running. Like, it's going to be better than the alternatives if I'm playing a deck where I care about having my commander out consistently. I have some blue decks where I don't, and I'm not running it there because I don't know if I'm always going to have it out. But if I am going to have the commander out all the time, then not only is it always online, it's a protection piece for the commander that I need to have out. So strong consideration if I'm playing a deck where I care about the commander. It's in a lot of my decks where I do, for sure.
Yeah, I think this and Force of Will, just 2 free counter spells.
Yep.
They're both 3s for me. I don't know if you're necessarily going to try to cut other game changers for them to make room, but you're never wrong for playing these. If your commander matters, or if you're just trying to make sure that you're not losing the game out of the blue, both of these are super powerful, super important cards that like you do want to consider at least.
Yeah. I think Force feels a little bit less accidentally fantastic in bracket 3 particularly, but come on,
there's at least like a remote downside.
Yeah, but it's still a crazy card for sure.
Yeah, super good. Well, the next one, I think I know what your answer is on this one. So next up is Food Chain. So it's 2 and a green for an enchantment. It says you can exile a creature you control to add X mana of any one color, where X is 1 plus the exiled creature's mana value. Spend this mana only to cast creature spells.
You're either playing a Food Chain deck or you're not.
There it is. Yep.
If you're playing a Food Chain deck, a deck built around doing it, it's a 4. If you're not, I don't think you want to give a slot to it.
Yeah, absolutely. You're playing a Food Chain deck or you're not. And it's very, very black and white. And it's hard to have an accidental food chain.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
One that I think is a little more playable, just broadly, probably one of the most powerful lands in the game. But I'm curious where we both fall on this. Is Gaea's Cradle. Just tap it to add a green mana for each creature you control.
Yeah, I wrote 2 down for this. I'm not sure why. Particularly because the things that make this good are things that Green's always doing. Like it's just Green's, the amount of Green decks that aren't making a bunch of creatures are few and far between. I think if this was a $10 card, man, the amount of Green decks I would run it in, I don't know which ones wouldn't have it.
It is hard to separate the price from the functionality for sure.
Yes. Yeah. So that hurts a little bit, but yeah, like if you have one and you are playing green, I think it's a strong consider as the best card in your deck in some situations for sure.
Yeah, I do think it is a little narrow just for every single bracket 3 deck to want to consider that's playing green.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, it might be an ancillary color. You may not be playing a ton of creatures, and maybe it only taps for like 2 or 3 mana, which I mean that still is very, very good. That's still game changer quality.
Yeah.
But if your deck isn't built to play around it, it's not as optimal as I think a lot of people just blanket say it is.
Yeah.
So I do think it is genuinely a 2, and this is coming from someone who loves playing creature decks. Just because you're not playing it to really, if you're not playing it to abuse it, then it's just really good instead of incredibly good.
So Glacial Chasm next on our list here. What's interesting about this is maybe the card that got hurt the most by crop rotation being put on the list.
Mm-hmm.
The ability to add instant speed, drop a Glacial Chasm in play is huge. And the fact that you now have to devote a slot to crop rotation to make Chasm work makes Chasm significantly weaker because those are 2 things that are kind of joined at the hip. But it's still a pretty good card. It's still pretty good defensively. I think, again, I'm not generally considering it. I'm specifically considering it like, oh, this deck is very grindy and very slow, and I want to have the ability to have nobody hit me for, several turns unless they have a perfect answer. So there are decks where I'm like, this is kind of perfect for this deck. But outside of that environment, it's not something that's like feels like I want to generally put in a deck. So I'm going to call it a 2, but that's maybe a stretch. It could very easily be a 1.
So I'm pretty low on Glacial Chasm, actually. There's so much work you have to do to make Glacial Chasm yes, every card in theory is abusable. I can recognize that, but
sure.
Glacial Chasm as a game changer requires you to build extra pieces in around it to either play it from your graveyard so you can sacrifice it every turn and replay it, and you remove all of the cumulative upkeep counters. A lot of the other game changers that I'm putting into decks, they don't need hand-holding to be optimal.
Yeah.
That's where, like you said, crop rotation is a really good piece of that.
Yeah.
So really, like Glacial Chasm is 2 game changers. It takes up more than just 1 card in the 99. And that to me is Glacial Chasm's biggest problem when I'm building decks. And I think what a lot of people, because if somebody plays Glacial Chasm and it's going to sit there for 2 or 3 turns and prevent me from attacking them or dealing damage, I mean, sometimes that happens in the course of a game anyways, where there's other problems at the table. So Glacial Chasm, for me, like there's just so much work you have to do to make it the abusable card that I saw a lot of reaction around Glacial Chasm.
Yeah. Grim Monolith next. So the thing with Grim Monolith is an incredibly powerful card. If you are running a bunch of the cards that make Grim Monolith an incredibly powerful card, we're talking about a similar situation of Glacial Chasm here. And in bracket 3, you're not running those cards. Those are cards that people tend to run in CEDH because they serve additional functions there to, generate infinite mana, interact with cards in kind of weird ways. That's just not happening in bracket 3. It's just not a good bracket 3 card. It's not to say it's not a great card, but like it's not better than the other choices you could be running in bracket 3 because it requires additional other pieces to work that you're probably not running.
Yeah. Yeah, 100% agreed. It's a 1 for me when it comes to bracket 3 decks. It's so narrow. You have to jump through a lot of hoops to make it that super powerful type of engine. Whereas if you go up to bracket 4 where that's more expected, and then especially at bracket 5 where you're at CDH, then yes, like Grim Monolith does become that, card that's going to take over the format and not format, but take over every single game you see it in for sure.
Yeah. Humility up next, the rules nightmare of all rules nightmares.
That it is indeed a rules nightmare. I have it as a 1 because it is such a rules nightmare and it is universal. It hits your creatures as well. So it really hamstrings what you are doing. I have it as a 1. You have to do a lot of work to make this very narrow but specific and dominating effect, in my mind, worth it for bracket 3 decks. If you do that, then it's super powerful and it's going to warp the game, but you have to do so much work around it or just flood the board with more creatures than your opponents have.
If you are doing the things for the most part that make humility worth running in a deck, you're not doing them on bracket 3. It's just not a bracket 3 card.
Probably not. Yeah. So what about a card that you do not have to do a whole lot of work to make this really, really good?
Jeska's Will.
Yeah.
If I'm playing red, I'm strongly considering it as one of the best, like, both mana and card advantage options for the cost that I can be running in this bracket. And just generally speaking, this isn't one of those cards where, like, well, maybe if I'm doing a specific thing, if I'm in red, I want mana and I want cards. There's no situation where you don't want those two things. It is going head to head with anything else I could be doing. It's a 4 if I have access to red. It's competing with something for sure for a slot.
Yeah, it's going to push other game changers out. You want to consider, I have it as a 3, but if you give it a 4, I'm not going to say you're wrong at all. Sure. It's super powerful, especially if you're playing and like your deck revolves around having your commander in play where you're getting the mana and the card advantage. Then this could be the best card in your deck for sure. I think it depends. It's a little too deck reliant to be an automatic 4 where you're cutting other game changers for Jeska's Will, but you do want to consider it whenever you're putting it in deck or whenever you're building a deck that has red.
So up next we have Lion's Eye Diamond. This one again feels pretty easy. There's nothing you're doing in bracket 3 that where you want a Lion's Eye Diamond. It's not to say it's not an amazing card. It's just not a bracket 3 card. It's a bracket. It's a CEDH card where it's an absolute house. It's in for what you're doing in bracket 3. It's just not doing those things.
Yeah, I think the next few cards that we're going to talk about all suffer from the same problem in my mind, where it's not necessarily a great card for bracket 3 because what it's doing is so specific. Like sure. You're not playing it in just any given deck in Legacy, but like if you're playing Storm, then yes, you are absolutely playing Lion's Eye Diamond. In these Storm decks are all about getting just enough mana, and they have ways to recur it because it's in the deck building process that like you're putting everything together. You're making decisions with Lion's Eye Diamond in consideration from the get-go. And it's the same thing. I mean, we'll just throw the next couple cards out there too. Mana Vault and Mox Diamond. Yeah. I don't know if they're universally these hyper powerful cards that you absolutely want to make room for in your decks when you have to budget only those 3 slots. Right. And Lion's Eye Diamond really doesn't get there for me. Mana Vault, kind of the same thing that we were talking about with Grim Monolith, where it's powerful, but you're not built and you're not equipped to really maximize what that card is capable of.
Yeah, they are amazingly powerful cards in the CEDH bracket, maybe bracket 4. The things you're doing in bracket 3 don't need that like perfect efficiency, that perfect speed. You're better served with something a little clumsier, but that has like broad appeal versus just ramping you forward. Amazing cards are just not what most people are doing in bracket 3.
Yeah, I think both of these are ones in my mind. Yeah. Mishra's Workshop comes up next, which is one that is very, very powerful. I just don't know if I've ever seen one in Commander because nobody has however many thousands of dollars for it. But Mishra's Workshop, it's a land that taps for 3 colorless mana, but you can only use it to cast artifacts.
Again, it's tough to separate this from the price, but I feel like the reality is if this was a $10 card, a $5 card, whatever, if people had access to this, I think it's in every equipment deck. It's in every vehicle deck. It's in every like general artifact deck, because why not when a lot of those lists, half of your spells are some form of artifact. It's just the best land you can cast. But no one has it, right? And it also carries that kind of the mental weight of being a Mishra's Workshop. So like even if you have one, it would feel weird to run it in bracket 3. Yeah. It's a tough card to evaluate because of all of the stuff baked into what it is.
Yeah, I think I know 2 people in all of Magicdom like that I actually know that even have one. I don't think they're going to put it in any decks. If price were no object, I still think it would be a 2 because it is limited on what you can use it on, even though that is extremely powerful and a good chunk of decks would be wanting to play it. Just not every single one.
Right.
I don't think so. Yeah.
It's not like Rhystic Study where like, oh, I have access to blue, I want to consider it. Just because I have access to this doesn't mean I want it in that deck necessarily.
Yeah, for sure. So I know I mentioned this one a minute ago, but Mox Diamond is one. I'm a little more open on this one when it comes to fast mana than some of the other options that we have. So when Mox Diamond comes into play, choose and discard a land card or sacrifice Mox Diamond, and then you can tap it to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, and it is a 0 mana artifact.
The one thing about this that makes it a little more interesting is because you're discarding the thing, there is a little bit of added synergy there with this, maybe in some decks. Again, if the price wasn't a question and the reputation wasn't a question, this might have a little bit of extra utility beyond just being a rock, because there are situations where like there's decks that want to put that land in the yard, into the graveyard.
Well, and you said the thing right there. There's so many decks that do want to put lands in their graveyards because they can just play them later on. So this is a 2 for me. This isn't a 1 like a lot of the other fast mana where it's just a ritual effect, basically. This one does have some upside over the course of the game. So I'm not super hard on Mox Diamond, but the price is absolutely silly for sure.
Yeah. Narset, Parter of Veils up next. And this is very much a Stacks-esque piece. Planeswalker. Each opponent can't draw more than 1 card each turn, and that's a static ability. For the most part, that's why Narset exists. You can also -2 Narset, look at the top 4 cards of your library and reveal a non-creature, non-land card and put it into your hand, so you have a little bit of a non-draw effect on it. But like for the most part, this is about keeping your opponents from drawing a bunch of cards.
And I don't think that's ever a bad effect to have, especially like when you start getting to bracket 3 and above, where people like to play. If people are playing Rhystic Studies, why not play a card that stops their Rhystic Studies?
For me personally, I always feel like it's maybe not worth the hassle to keep people from doing things because of the heat it generates. But some of that's maybe my play style too. Like I like to fly under the radar. So I tend to value this effect a little bit less. I want to be moving forward versus keeping everyone else a step back. But that's not necessarily universally the best way to play. It's just how I play. So if you are someone who is more into maybe slung people up versus advancing your own game state, then I can see why you would want to play this and if over something else you could play in those colors.
Yeah, I still think it's a 3. I think it's something you want to consider. It might be playgroup dependent a little bit, but it's still like shutting down and keeping your opponents from pulling too far ahead. That's something that is super powerful that you want to have happen. Like, especially once you get to that bracket 3, it's just, again, it's competing with so much in these blue game changers. But next card that we're going to talk about does not get shut down by Narset Part of Veils somehow. No. Necropotence, which is black for an enchantment that says skip your draw step, and then you can discard or whenever you discard a card, you exile that card from your graveyard, and you can pay 1 life and exile the top card of your library face down, and you put that card into your hand at the beginning of your next end step, which is a hyper powerful draw engine. I think I know what your answer is here, Dana.
Yeah, this is a 3 for me, and that's not to say it's not really powerful, and it's worth considering if you have access to black, but you have to look at some different factors. Okay, is it going to cause a problem skipping my draw step? Is it going to cause problems if I have to discard stuff and have it exiled? Versus something like Rhystic Study where it's just amazing. It doesn't matter. Nothing else matters. It's amazing. Cyclonic Rift is just amazing. Nothing else matters. Other things matter here. And because other things matter, it's a 3 for me versus being a 4.
Yeah, other things do matter. I still think, again, man, this is really good. There might be a little bit of a drawback in some corner cases, but
yes,
it's a really, really good card. It's
absolutely
probably one of the most powerful cards, maybe in all of Magic. This kind of dominated things when it was first printed. It still can dominate games today. It's hard to not like Necropotence. So it's a 3.
And if we're talking bracket 4, that's a different thing entirely because there's no competition. You're not you're not measuring this against what else you could be running. Yeah, amazing. In the higher the bracket gets, the better it gets. It's awesome, and I understand why Joey has a large version of this card behind him in his recording area.
Whenever he records, yeah. Well, okay, so the next 3 cards, 3 hate bears coming up. So we have Notion Thief, which is a 3/1 with flash. Costs 4 mana. If an opponent would draw a card except the first one they draw in each of their draw steps, instead that player skips the draw and you draw a card. Then you have something like Orcish Bowmasters, which is 1 and a black for 1/1 with flash. If Orcish Bowmasters enter the battlefield, and whenever an opponent Draws a card except the first one they would draw in each of their draw steps. Orcish Bowmasters deals 1 damage to any target, and then you amass Orcs 1. And finally, we have the Tutoring Hate Bear, Opposition Agent, which is a 3/2 with Flash. And you control your opponents while they're searching their libraries. And then while an opponent is searching their library, you may exile each card they find, and you may play those cards for as long as they remained exiled and spend mana as though it were any color of mana to cast them. All 3 of these feel like that's something that we've been saying a lot today. These are really, really powerful in CDH, but they just get a little less straightforward when it comes to including them in bracket 3 decks.
Yeah, and similar to Narset Part of Reveals, I think this is one of those situations where, generally speaking, you are better off advancing your game state versus slowing your opponents up, particularly in bracket 3. Different situation when you get to 4, particularly when you get to 5, but in bracket 3, usually you're better off just worrying about pushing yourself forward. As a result, these wind up being like in the 1 to 2s for me. I think there's better things you can be doing with your 3 slots in bracket 3 than these cards, which isn't to say they're not amazing, but in that bracket where they're competing with something for a slot, I would rather run something else than run these cards.
Run something else more proactive than run these very reactive cards.
Yes.
I think 2 is a good spot for the 3 of these cards. If the play group calls for it, sure, like they're fine, but they're just doing something maybe a little too narrow when, I think bracket 3 is a little bit more about being more proactive with your own gameplay, and especially Opposition Agent. Like I have Archivist of Ogma in my Council of 4 deck, which I draw a card, gain a life whenever an opponent searches their library. At brackets 2, where that deck is, I don't really see a whole lot. Now, I know fetch lands and moving up a bracket makes a huge, huge difference. But there have been games where Archivist of Ogma has done absolutely nothing.
Sure.
And I've seen games where Opposition Agent sits there and maybe it steals a fetch land in response. But then once it's out there, you're only getting people once with all of these cards. Then everybody's able to play around that, which is, I think that's the biggest downfall in brackets 3, where once people can see it, like they're not just going all out, like they're going to play around a little bit.
Yeah. Up next here, we have one of our recent unbans, Panoptic Mirror. So it's an artifact that lets you imprint a spell onto it to cast that spell. Very often people are imprinting an extra turn effect on this so they can untap and do the same thing next turn. And like basically infinite turns kind of for the most part if you have Panoptic Mirror and an extra turn effect on it. Where do you rate this one here, Matt?
I think a Panoptic Mirror is really good in a Panoptic Mirror deck.
Again, yes.
It's going to get this treatment here again, where, yes, like it is a very, very powerful effect, but you have to build around it, and a lot of the cards that you might want to be putting under Panoptic Mirror.
Sure.
Once you get there, it's fine, but you have to put a lot of support in there that are worth putting in a Panoptic Mirror.
Yep. Yeah. Is this one of the 3 cards I want to put in my bracket 3 deck? No. It's just never going to be the thing I choose. There's always going to be a better option, I feel like, than what Panoptic Mirror is. Not to say it's not a great card. We're talking bracket 3 again, and I'm going to pick something else every time.
Yeah, I think that just the reason this is a game changer is to prevent abuse, and that's why it was banned for so long, is it's really easy to build this deck that just like makes miserable play patterns. That's why this is a game changer. And extra turns in the explanation of the brackets are kind of frowned upon under like the bracket 3 play space too. So if you want to build a Panoptic Mirror deck at bracket 3, like you have to make those decisions and weigh it against, like you mentioned, weigh it against all the other options that you have as game changers, but also, do I want to make those deck building decisions around Panoptic Mirror and include the types of cards I have to put in there in order to make Panoptic Mirror, worth that spot in the 99, not just in the game changers.
Well, up next is a card we've talked about a ton, despite having not actually gotten to talk about it yet. Rhystic Study, 2 and a blue for an enchantment. And whenever your opponents cast a non-creature spell, if they don't pay an additional 1, you draw a card.
It's a 4. It's a 4. It is. It's the card that we've kind of compared everything to so far this episode, which to me is the definition of a 4, where you're cutting other game changers to make room for Rhystic Study.
And don't get me wrong, I'm not running it in a bunch of blue decks that are bracket 3 because like it's annoying. And
that's a you decision.
Absolutely.
That's not a Like, if you look at it objectively, like, this is the right call to make in so many decks.
Ignoring that, it's the best thing you can be doing if you have access to game changers and you have access to blue, like, or one of the couple best things you should be doing. Like, it just is.
Yeah. To take all the commentary and like personal preferences aside, like,
yeah,
I have to repeat it. Like, we have been comparing every other blue game changer to Rhystic Study.
Right. Yes.
Like, this is one that you cut other game changers for. Yep. No, yes, it absolutely is annoying. And if your play group like needs something a little easier to get along with, Rhystic Study is not that card. But if you were just looking in a vacuum, Rhystic Study is one of the most powerful effects in Magic.
And quite frankly, the next one on the list is as well. Seedborn Muse. Like, if you have access to green, and I have a ton of green decks that aren't running it. I think I have it in one of my green decks that's a Helix Pinnacle deck because I want to pump as much mana into Helix Pinnacle. Thematically, it makes sense there. I'm not running it anywhere else. Objectively, again, what it does, is as good as anything you're going to be doing in green. Amazing card.
Yeah. 5 mana to untap all permanents you control during each other player's untap step. Yeah. I know our friend Rachel Weeks said, okay, I'm going to pass to you and it's going to be our turn now.
Right.
Because that's kind of what Seedborn Muse does. And the fact that Seedborn Muse, I mean, it's a 4 in my mind. You cut other green game changers for Seedborn Muse. I think the fact that like this Seedborn Muse is only half of Prophet of Kruphix.
Right.
And it still is one of the most dominant potentially cards in Commander. That also should narrate why Prophet of Kruphix never needs to come back off the ban list.
Yes, for sure. Up next is the white version of Gaea's Cradle. Taps for a mana for every enchantment you control. Unlike green decks always playing creature stacks, white decks aren't always playing enchantments. This one's much narrower, I feel like, than Gaea's Cradle. If you're playing some kind of an enchantment deck, it's, again, the best card you could be running possibly in a Selesnya or Mono White or Naya enchantment deck. If you're not doing it, it's probably not doing you very much good at all. If you're not doing that thing, I don't think you want a slot for it.
Yeah, I have this as a 1. And it stings because like Serra's Sanctum is an extremely powerful Magic card, but it's only good in one specific archetype. And to me, like, if you're in that archetype, yes, you want to consider it, but that's what we've kind of said about several cards so far. Sure. And so, it sucks to give Serra's Sanctum that treatment. But to me, like, you're not playing it if you're only running 10 enchantments in your deck.
Absolutely. Right. Exactly. So another card we've talked about quite a bit here, despite having not gotten to it in the list, Smothering Tithe, 4 mana, and it's similar to Rhystic Study. It's a tax effect. When your opponent draws a card, they can choose to pay 2, and if they don't, you make a treasure.
This card's kind of busted. It's kind of a 4 as well. Like, players are going to draw cards. That's just how, like, every turn happens. Like, that's not something that is unpredictable. That is a fundamental part of taking your turn in Magic. And so Smothering Tithe, either taxing them on that card draw or giving you a treasure like that adds up so much. Like, that the value that you generate, even if you're not just getting a ton of treasure tokens, even if you're just taxing the card draw from your opponents, that gets annoying really, really quickly. Like, that changes the course of how they're going to play out their turns. Like, this is a 4. Like, you want to make room in every single deck if you're playing white.
So this is one of the cards I talked about a little, or that caused us to do this show topic. And I'm going to call this a 3, although maybe that's not appropriate. And here's why. Because this is a white card, it's always being compared to Teferi's Protection for me. And if I have to choose, Teferi's Protection wins every single time. It is white's version of Rhystic Study. It's never a wrong choice. So again, we're talking bracket 3, so there's some competition here, and it's going to lose to me that competition with Teferi's Protection in every single deck. But you've got 3 slots, not 1 slot. So I'm strongly considering it in a lot of white decks for sure.
Yeah, like you said, you get 3 slots, not just 1.
Yes,
so
correct.
Yes, you're right. Comparing every single card to Teferi's Protection, that's fine. But I think it's 1A and 1B. Like, Smothering Tithe, just how it warps your opponent's play patterns is incredibly powerful. That isn't to say Teferi's Protection isn't the white Rhystic Study of game changers. I'm just saying that Rhystic Study, Smothering Tithe, Teferi's Protection, like, if those were 3 game changers in any deck that's playing blue and white, nobody's ever going to question it anyway.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, like, yes, maybe Smothering Tithe loses to Teferi's Protection, but it beats every other white game changer in my mind.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. I think it's always going to be a card if I'm brewing white in bracket 3, I'm at least considering. And there's not a lot of cards I can say that about.
Yeah.
Well, in that's having that phrase in mind that you're always considering it is a good thing to bear in mind to talk about the next card, Survival of the Fittest. Also an enchantment, 1 in a green. You can spend a green to discard a creature card and search your library for a creature card and reveal it and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. There's a ton of decks where it's doing all the things you want. You're discarding a creature to your graveyard where you're going to do something with it, and you're getting an even better creature in your hand that you're going to do something with next turn. Mm-hmm. But I don't have decks that hit that criteria. Like, I just don't. I have no decks where those specific combination of things is better than something else I could be doing versus the Teferi's Protection or the Rhystic Studies or the Smothering Tithes, where they're just always one of the best things you could be doing. So this, to me, I mean, like, undoubtedly a super powerful card, but it's going to wind up being a 1 or a 2 for me, somewhere in there, because your deck just has to want to do those things, and I just don't think every deck wants to be doing what it does.
I can't put this any lower than a 2 because that's where I put the Worldly Tutor. That's where I put the green tutors, which are very easily repeated.
That makes sense.
And you can do that off the Game Changer list to an extent. But Survival of the Fittest, I think there's an argument too. Like, if you're playing graveyard decks, you want this card.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're playing creature decks, you want this card. Like, the applications for this are a lot broader.
Absolutely.
And yes, taking personal preferences aside, like I said, I don't like tutors, but I still think, like, there's a lot of competition there. It's really, really dense. Like, I think the price of Survival of the Fittest being an old card on the reserve list, that is probably a little bit harder to separate and maybe playing an influence in my number. Because I say every time I've seen Survival of the Fittest, it's not felt like a card that I would, like, maybe I'll cut it for a natural order or whatever else, but it's got a lot more application than a food chain. That is for dang sure.
It's one of those cards that, because of the price and because of the age and because of the reputation, it's one of those things like, maybe it doesn't feel appropriate in bracket 3, despite the fact that it's a game changer and you could run it. It might feel out of place because it has that kind of reputation.
Maybe. It's really good. It's getting you what you want. And if you're playing a creature deck, like, you probably want to consider it, it's too broad and it has too many applications to be
a 1. Sure.
A 1 in my mind.
That's fair.
Yeah,
that's fair.
So okay. How about a card that I think we're both going to agree?
Yeah.
Pretty quickly on Sway of the Stars, the newly unbanned Sway of the Stars, 10 mana for a sorcery. Each player shuffles their hand, graveyard, and permanents they control into their library, then draw 7 cards, and each player's life total then becomes 7. This feels like a wildfire type of thing where, like, you did it once and you move on, and it's only ever good in decks that very explicitly, like, try to do that one thing.
Yeah, unless your deck is built around doing this, it's just, even in mono blue, there's just 3 better options. There just are, like, generally speaking, unless, it's just never going to make that cut. It's a 1 for me for sure.
Yeah, I agree. It's 1. It's good in decks that really want to abuse it, but I just don't know how many decks there are, and that's kind of why we haven't seen the numbers even that we're seeing on EDH of decks that are playing Sway of the Stars.
Yeah,
like, it's the least played newly unbanned card that we've had so far.
Mm-hmm. Now, again, another card we've talked about a ton, Teferi's Protection. It just does.
Before we can move on.
Yeah, it does everything.
We've talked about it already.
Yeah, if I'm playing bracket 3 and I have access to white, I'm playing it. Like, it's that one of those 2 or 3 cards that, like, are just an automatic include based on utility and how powerful it is generally in every situation, no matter what.
Yep. I can't add anything else because, like you said, it just does everything. Yeah. It's a 4. If you're playing white, you're going to cut other game changers for it. That's the definition of this 4 rating that we are using for this episode. Yeah. So Teferi's Protection, you're always going to consider it no matter what.
Thassa's Oracle. Undoubtedly a powerful card. CEDH, it's probably the win condition that pops up more than any other win condition there.
Yeah, backbone of CDH for sure.
Yeah. Outside of that environment, I mean, not that people don't play it in lower environments, but like it's so specific. You are building a deck around doing something with Thassa's Oracle. And if your deck isn't built around that and you're really not doing that in bracket 3 very often, then it's just not any good necessarily.
I don't think it's not any good.
Or at least not good enough to justify a slot over something else.
Yeah, it is fine.
Yeah.
But like, unless you're playing the combo there, which you're probably not doing outside CDH. If you are, then you might have a bracket mismatch, honestly.
Sure.
And so, yeah, short of the combo, this is another one of those cards where it's a pillar in the CDH realm. But once you get down to bracket 3, you really don't see it all that often because it doesn't do enough for. I mean, if you look at Thassa's Oracle and what it does in bracket 3 versus all these other cards we've been talking about, the Rhystic Studies, the Consecrated Sphinxes, it really just does not hold up.
Yeah. What does hold up, however, is the One Ring.
The One Ring does hold up. 4 mana for an indestructible legendary artifact. When the One Ring enters the battlefield, if you cast it, you gain protection from everything until your next turn. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life for each burden counter on the One Ring. And then you can tap it to put a burden counter on the One Ring and then draw a card for each burden counter on it. This warps games. It's such a powerful, powerful engine. And I think just people need to focus more on these draw engines. I can't put it lower than I put Necropotence, but I think this gets a 4 rating for me. Like, you cut other game changers for this card.
I can think of not one, but 2 situations in the last several weeks to a month or so where I've cast this in a game at like 3 life or something and not cared that I couldn't tap it and afford to lose because the protection from everything for a turn was good enough. That was enough to like get me to where I needed to be to turn a corner or whatever. That ability alone in a lot of situations is worth 4 mana, let alone the repeated draw.
That's saying so much too, because so you're basically saying that a 4 mana sorcery speed Teferi's protection is good enough.
Right. Yes. Right.
Or a 4 mana sorcery speed Glacial Chasm just to fog everything just for a turn. And that alone is like a good card and good enough in situations.
Yeah.
That's not even taking into account the fact that you can draw just copious amounts of cards with this.
Yeah. If you drop this on turn 4 and no one has an exile effect, you're going to win that game by turn 8. Like, it's just how it works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you will. It's super powerful. If this is a 4, you cut other game changers to make room for the One Ring. Like, no matter what bracket you're at.
Yep. Up next, the Tabernacle of Pendrell Vale. So it's a land that doesn't tap for mana and puts a upkeep. Basically, you have to spend 1 mana for each creature or sacrifice those creatures. Crazy powerful, but the decks that want it, it's narrow. I don't know how many decks actually want this effect. I actually have a deck. I have a Kedison Crom deck, and it's a bracket 4 deck. If I had a Tabernacle, I would probably run it because there's only 2 creatures and they're both commanders. So for the most part, I will just play this and it would cause problems for everyone else and doesn't really affect me. And bracket 4, I'd feel pretty comfortable playing it too. But bracket 3, I just don't think there's enough decks that want to do that and are comfortable with like causing that much chaos and locking people out too. So in bracket 3, it winds up being a 1 for me.
I don't. The effect is just so powerful.
Yeah,
I think the price is influencing a lot of people's minds on this because it's unobtainably expensive.
Yes,
it is fine. Like, I have gotten to see a couple in play. I have a friend who has one, and it's been fine. I don't think it was the most powerful deck. Like, he was built playing a stacks deck to begin with, but I was able to play around it, and I just extended at the right time and had to plan a few turns out. Like, it's super powerful. But also, like, you want to be playing in a fairly specific strategy to be doing that. Like, you don't want to put it just blindly in any given deck because it affects your creatures too. That's something that is super important that people kind of overlook sometimes.
And the strategy that wants it just isn't a bracket 3 strategy for the most part.
I think that is the big thing. Yeah, it's not a bracket 3 card because of the social implications there.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like if you have one, you want to put it in bracket 3 because you have a deck that happens to be doing that. That's fine. It's a 2 rating for me in this system, but I can't put it any higher.
Yeah. Well, last but not least here, Underworld Breach, a card that's terrified a whole bunch of formats over the last several years. It's basically your Red's Yawgmoth's Will, and CEDH level, probably bracket 4 even. It's an absolute powerhouse. Less so in bracket 3, I feel like something like Jeska's Will or Deflecting Swat is generally more useful on average than this is. This needs a little more specific deck that super low curve, bunch of things that you want to recur or loop, that kind of thing. So I'm going to call it a 2 for that reason. I look at it plenty often when I go to brew a bracket 3 deck, and I'm like, do I want Breach? So I'm considering it in a way that I never consider Sway the Stars or something. But I also never wind up running it. So
it's hard to really evaluate this one because it's such a combo heavy card. Like you play that in those combo decks that like the turn you play Underworld Breach is the turn you plan on winning. And that's kind of why it's, so good in other formats. In bracket 3 though, like it could be just a really, really good value engine. You you get to recur 4 or 5 spells from your graveyard. You have to be equipped a little bit to play it. So there does need to be a little bit of work. And when you evaluate it versus the other red game changers, like granted, there aren't a lot of other red game changers.
For sure.
That's the problem. But if you're in a mono red deck and you just need a way to, like you said, a Yawgmoth's Will type of card, Underworld Breach can do a lot of work later in the game where, you have 15 cards in your graveyard or even more. That gives you enough fuel to kind of crank through and get a good chunk of value, claw back into the game. Like it's very, very powerful. You just it's a little too deck dependent, I would say, to kind of be blindly considered. But in the decks that it's really good in, it is super good in. But then when that's not even like considering CEDH where, you play this card and you win.
But like if I'm even, Brigham on a red list or something, I just it would have to be a very specific deck for me to want this over Deflecting Swat, over Jeska's Will, over Ancient Tomb, over the One Ring. Like just those 4 off the top of my head as cards I would be strongly considering a mono red. There's very few situations where this beats one of those 4 out.
Where again, like in that situation, it comes down to what's the commander I'm doing, what's the strategy. Absolutely. Is there something I am wanting to happen in the graveyard? Yeah. And if that is the case, then like I still do think like you do give a second look to Underworld Breach. Yeah.
It's a super strong card. It's just kind of in a general sense, it winds up being that the best choice less often than the competition is.
Yeah, for sure.
61 cards later.
61 cards later. The game changer list, like this did go a little bit longer than I thought it was going to be, but also I forgot that we added so many cards a couple months ago to the game changer list.
But it's definitely something that like having had a chance to spend several weeks and several months looking at it, my perspective has changed a little bit, particularly when we're talking about this bracket 3 thing where it is a matter of competition. That particular lens is what winds up being most relevant, I think, regarding these game changers, is looking at them through the lens of what do I have to choose to run or not run in this particular bracket.
Yeah, the deck building challenge and the mini game almost that bracket 3 decks have where you have to really consider not just like how does this game changer fall in terms of the deck, but also in terms of the only 3 very limited spaces that I have with these game changers and comparing everything to each other. And I know you kept going back to, Teferi's Protection and Smothering Tithe, but like everybody's been able to do that and everybody's had to do that in these bracket 3 decks. And it's been a fun challenge for me just as a deck build. Like I have to evaluate a card on 2 different axes when it comes to these game changers.
No, the mini game aspect of it. Not only do I think it's been useful for just balancing out games, I genuinely find it interesting. It makes for a fun brewing challenge that I enjoy having to make those choices.
So I remember when these brackets were first released, and to me at least, it felt you were kind of lukewarm on bracket 3. The game changers, is it going to do enough? Do you think that the 3 game changer limit has done enough to really separate? Because this has been kind of a hot topic in the community. Has the 3 game changer limit separated bracket 3 enough from brackets 2 and bracket 4?
I think so. Particularly if you are engaging with it in good faith. The people I know that have done so, like, are intentionally really trying to, like, no, this deck places a bracket 2, this places a 3, this places a 4, and I want to keep them spaced out based on what the intent of the brackets are. I do think there's enough breathing room between them. Now that I've seen everyone do that and have some time to brew and, like, make a few changes to their decks, absolutely. I think I can see the difference in a way that was a little bit blurrier early on.
Yeah. Okay. I'm glad to hear that, because I know, and listeners, please let us know in the comments too, if this is something that you're still seeing or still wanting, because I remember we've had comment sections before where we talk about game changers in the brackets where a bracket 3.5 or a bracket 2.5 is something that people seem kind of high on, where it just creates a little more separation between bracket 3 and brackets 2 or 3 and 4. And maybe they need their own identity. I don't know. I've been really enjoying bracket 3 though. It's where I've probably played
I have too.
A majority of my games personally since this new bracket system has been released.
And I also think that, like, I know we're not probably getting any changes this year, but, you know, next year after, as they maybe even add a few more cards to this, I think that's a good thing. Like, that then tweaks that a little bit further. Okay, I have to make even more choices now. This card's been added to the game changer list, so now it's competing with this or that. Like, I have to, like, now make decisions. I think it's going to keep things fresh as a few more cards maybe come on or come off the list.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, you mentioned cards coming on or going off. Do you think there's any cards that are going to get added to the game changer list with, like, Final Fantasy, with Dragonstorm that's just came out? Excuse me, I drew a blank on the name. I mean, I think the obvious one is Vivi. That's the new, probably going to be a game changer commander.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that assessment, or do you think there's any other cards from Final Fantasy that might be game changers?
I'm hesitant to say anything right now, because particularly with regards to commanders in the command zone, there's a whole list of ones we've heard people like, oh, this has to get banned over the years, that will end up being a non-issue.
Sure.
So I'd like to see it get played out a little bit, but if in 6 months VV got added to that list, the game changer list, I would not be shocked based on just what I've seen. It is as powerful as anything else that's been added to the list from the command zone.
Yeah, 100% agree. I would not be shocked if this is made a game changer. Is it spellslinger type of thing? It's not even just instants and sorceries. It's just non-creature spells. Yeah. It still hurts my brain seeing that. It's very, very pushed. I wouldn't say I'm expecting it, but I'm not going to be surprised at all.
Yeah. I think the other thing about VV that's interesting, because people are such fans of the character, I think there's going to be less self-control about where it shows up than there is with some other commanders, like maybe a Tergrid or something. So I think that might well contribute to it going onto the game changer list as well down the road.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. Yeah, good call.
All right, I think that's going to wrap up this episode of the EDH Recast. Matt, why don't you tell folks where they can find you on the interwebs?
So you can find me on pretty much any social media platform at Mathimus55. That's MATHIMUS55. And don't forget, we are proud to work with Dragon Shield. Make sure you check out, Dragon Shield always has some really cool event exclusive sleeves. So make sure you head over there too, because you're definitely going to want to pick those up.
I am Dana Roach. You can find me online at Dana Roach. I'm writing articles for EDH Rec, and you can find all of us together at patreon.com/EDH Recast. Thanks for listening, and remember, EDH Wreck your deck before you wreck your deck.